My name is Hadley Vance, and for the first 32 years of my life, I understood the weight of my surname the way a deep-sea diver understands pressure, a constant, crushing force that dictates your every move, your every breath. To be born of Vance in Boston was not merely a matter of lineage, it was to be handed a script at birth, a role to be performed in a play that had been running for generations. Our family's Beacon Hill townhouse was not a home so much as a museum dedicated to its own legacy. The air within its hallowed walls smelled of beeswax, lemon oil on centuries-old mahogany, and the subtle, suffocating perfume of old money and unyielding expectations. My father, Senator Graham Vance, was a man carved from New England granite and pure, uncut ambition. At 65, his posture was as unflinching as his political record. His world was one of power, of carefully brokered deals in quiet wood-paneled rooms, and of maintaining the family's unimpeachable public facade. He possessed the Vance smile, a formidable tool that was not an expression of joy, but a calibrated weapon capable of disarming allies and intimidating adversaries with equal, chilling efficiency. My mother, Eleanor, 62, was the museum's head curator. Every floral arrangement, every dinner party guest list, every charitable board she sat on was a strategic move on the grand chessboard of Boston's high society. She managed our family's image with the quiet, fervent devotion of a high priestess tending a demanding deity. And then there were my sisters. Larkin at 40 and Arden at 38 were my parents' masterpieces, flawless reflections of their values. Larkin, with her polished elegance and a marriage to a third-generation investment banker, was the embodiment of tradition. She moved through life with a serene, practiced grace, her every action reinforcing the family's dynastic credentials. Arden, bolder and fiercely competitive, channeled the family's ambition into the world of luxury fashion, collecting board seats and mentions in society columns like they were hunting trophies. She wore her ambition like a couture gown, sharp and dazzling. I was the anomaly, the dissonant note in their carefully composed symphony. From my earliest memories, I felt a profound disconnect between the world presented to me and the landscape of my own soul. I recall with painful clarity an afternoon when I was 16 during a fitting for my debutante gown. I stood on a small pedestal in an opulent salon surrounded by mirrors and acres of ivory silk. My mother and sisters orbited me like soft, critical hum. "The neckline is far too daring, Hadley." "Your posture, dear, shoulders back, a Vance does not slouch." "That fabric, does it not look a trifle common?" I looked at my reflection, a girl drowning in silk and expectations, and felt an overwhelming urge to tear it all off and run until my lungs burned and the scent of lemon oil was finally gone from my nostrils. That silent rebellion simmered for years, finally finding its voice not in a shout, but in a quiet, determined choice. While my sisters pursued degrees in art history and economics at Ivy League universities, paths that would seamlessly integrate them into the family's world, I chose social work. To my family, it was a bewildering, almost vulgar choice. "Social work," my father had boomed across the dinner table, the crystal vibrating with his disapproval. "What on earth for? If you wish to help the less fortunate, your mother can find you a suitable charity to chair." They saw it as a grimy, thankless hobby, not a profession. For me, it was an escape hatch. It was a world built on empathy, not etiquette, on raw, unfiltered human connection, not calculated social maneuvering. It was the first thing I had ever chosen for myself, and the act of choosing felt like drawing my first real breath. My work took me to the corners of Boston my family pretended didn't exist. I spent my days in underfunded community centers, cramped apartments, and sterile government offices. I listened to stories of struggle and resilience that the dramas of Beacon Hill feel laughably insignificant. I learned to navigate the labyrinthine bureaucracy of social services and to fight for people who had no one else to fight for them. It was exhausting, often heartbreaking work, but it was real. It was a life of substance, not just appearance. It was in this world, my world, that I met Atticus Hawthorne. I was 3 years into my career, working on a pro bono case for a community legal aid group. He was a new staff attorney, 33 years old, with a quiet intensity that set him apart. He wasn't like the men from my family's circle, with their polished veneers and easy, entitled charm. Atticus was grounded. He had kind lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, and he listened with an unnerving stillness, as if your words were the only thing that mattered in the universe. Our first conversation was in a drab, fluorescent-lit office over a stack of case files. We were supposed to be discussing a housing dispute, but the conversation drifted. We talked about literature, about the ethics of our work, about the simple joy of hiking in the Blue Hills Reservation. I found myself telling him things I'd never articulated to anyone else, about the feeling of living in a gilded cage, about my yearning for a life that felt authentic. He didn't offer pity or judgment, he simply nodded, his gaze steady and understanding. It must be difficult, he said, to build your own compass when you're handed a map at birth. For the first time, I felt truly seen. Our relationship blossomed over the next 3 years, a slow, beautiful unfurling. It was a connection built in the quiet spaces, shared late nights at the office, long walks along the Charles River, lazy Sunday mornings in his sun-drenched Back Bay apartment, a place filled with books and art, not ancestral portraits. He was everything my family wasn't, genuine, unassuming, and completely unconcerned with wealth or status. He came from a family of teachers and librarians in Vermont, people who valued curiosity and kindness above all else. With him, I didn't have to perform. I could be just Hadley. When he proposed, it wasn't with a grand, ostentatious gesture. It was a crisp October afternoon on a trail overlooking a quiet, fiery Vermont valley. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. He didn't have a velvet box. He simply took my hand, his own warm and steady, and looked at me with that same quiet intensity from our first meeting. He spoke of his love for me, of how my strength and compassion inspired him. Then he slipped a ring onto my finger. It was his grandmother's, a modest gold band with a small, beautifully cut sapphire. It was the Hawthorne ancestral ring, as he called it, its value measured in love and history, not carats. Tears streamed down my face as I said yes. It was a moment of pure, unvarnished truth, a perfect reflection of the life we were building together. In that moment, holding his hand, the modest ring feeling weighty and significant on my finger, I felt an unshakable joy. It was a joy so pure and personal that, for a brief, blissful moment, I completely forgot that I would eventually have to announce our engagement to the Vances. The bubble of our private joy, shimmering and perfect, lasted for 3 days. 3 days of floating through a world that seemed softer, brighter, and entirely our own. We kept our news to ourselves, hoarding it like a precious secret. But we knew it couldn't last. The Vances, like a weather system, could not be ignored indefinitely. The pressure to announce our engagement began to build, a low hum beneath the surface of our happiness. "How do we do this?" I asked Atticus one evening, curled up on the sofa in his apartment, the modest sapphire on my finger catching the lamplight. "There's no version of this announcement that they'll simply accept." "We do it on our terms," he said, his voice calm and reassuring as always. "A simple phone call. We state the facts. We're engaged, we're happy, and we're planning a small ceremony. We don't ask for permission or approval. We inform them." His logic was sound, but my stomach still twisted into a tight knot. Informing my family of a decision was like informing a hurricane it ought to blow east. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and dialed my mother's number. "Hadley, darling." Eleanor's smooth, melodic voice answered. "Is everything all right? It's a Tuesday." The unspoken subtext was clear. Unplanned calls on a weeknight were for emergencies, not pleasantries. "Everything is wonderful, Mother," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have some lovely news. Atticus and I are engaged." There was a beat of perfect, calculated silence on the other end of the line. It was just long enough to convey surprise without suggesting shock. Engaged, she repeated, the word tasting foreign in her mouth. Well, that is news. The young man from the legal aid office? Yes, Mother. Atticus Hawthorne. I see. Another pause, this one filled with the whirring of unseen gears. Well, congratulations, Hadley. We must, of course, have a proper celebration, and there is so much to plan. The announcement in the Times, the party, the venue. Larkin was just saying the other day that the Cotting Smith girl has booked the country club for next June, so we'll need to move quickly to secure a desirable date. Come to the house for dinner on Friday, all of us. We'll begin the preliminary planning. 7 o'clock. It was not a request, it was a summons. Before I could interject with my own plans for a small ceremony, she had added a breezy, "So happy for you, darling," and the line went dead. I looked at Atticus, my hand still clutching the phone. She didn't congratulate me so much as she scheduled an acquisitions meeting. "It's starting," he said softly, his expression one of gentle resignation. "Just remember, we're a team." Friday arrived with a sense of impending doom. Atticus offered to come with me, but I knew instinctively that this first battle had to be fought alone. His presence would only be seen as an immediate challenge to their authority. As I walked up the familiar stone steps of the Beacon Hill townhouse, I felt like a lamb returning to a very elegant, very well-appointed slaughterhouse. The scene in the formal dining room was exactly as I had pictured. My father stood at the head of the long, polished table, a glass of scotch in his hand. My mother was arranging a centerpiece of white roses with microscopic adjustments. Larkin and Arden were seated, their postures perfect, their expressions a mixture of polite curiosity and faint condescension. "Hadley," my father began, his senatorial voice filling the room, "your mother has informed us of your development. Congratulations." He took a sip of his scotch. "Hawthorne, not a Boston name, I take it?" "His family is from Vermont, father." "Charming," Arden murmured, a small, cutting smile on her lips. "Very rustic." Eleanor clapped her hands together, a sharp, decisive sound that cut through the tension. "Now, to the important matters. I've taken the liberty of compiling a preliminary guest list. We're looking at approximately 400 people. The governor, of course, Senator Thompson, the board members from the symphony and the museum." She slid a leather-bound folder across the table towards me. "And I've made some inquiries. The grand ballroom at the Fairmont is available for the first weekend of next October. It has the right sense of occasion." "October would be lovely," I said, pushing the folder back towards her. "But we won't be needing a ballroom or a guest list of 400. 4 pairs of eyes fixed on me. The air grew still. "Atticus and I continued, my heart hammering against my ribs, "have decided we want a small, intimate wedding. Just our immediate families and a few of our closest friends. Something meaningful to us, not a state dinner." Larkin was the first to speak. "Intimate." She said the word as if it were a communicable disease. "Hadley, a wedding is not a private dinner party. It is the most important social statement a family makes. It's about alliances, about cementing our place. An intimate wedding is what one has when one is trying to hide something." "I'm not trying to hide anything," I countered, my voice rising slightly. "I'm trying to have something real. I don't know half the people on that list. This is my wedding, my marriage to the man I love. It should reflect our values, not the family's political strategy." "Your values?" My father's voice was dangerously low. He placed his glass on the table with a heavy thud. "You speak of values. Let me tell you about the values of this family, Hadley. We value legacy. We value strength. We present a united, powerful front to the world. A hole-in-the-wall ceremony with a handful of people doesn't project strength. It projects weakness. It projects shame. It tells the world that we are not proud of this union." "That's ridiculous," I shot back, my composure finally cracking. It's not about projecting anything. It's about starting a life with Atticus. He ignored me, his gaze like ice. You will have a wedding befitting the Vance name. 400 guests. The Fairmont. Your mother and sisters will assist you with the appropriate selections for a dress and a caterer. The matter is not open for discussion. I stared at him, my throat tight with a mixture of rage and despair. I looked at my mother, who was studiously avoiding my gaze, her focus once again on the roses. I looked at Larkin and Arden, who wore identical expressions of cold satisfaction. They were a phalanx, an unbreakable wall of tradition and expectation. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I cleared my throat and said it again, louder, firmer. No. My father's face, which had been a mask of stern control, darkened into a thundercloud. He stood to his full, imposing height. What did you say? I said no, I repeated, standing up to meet his gaze. Atticus and I will get married the way we want. It will be small, and it will be ours. And if you're not proud of that, if you can't celebrate our happiness on our terms, then that is your choice. The finality in my voice hung in the air. Graham Vance looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something I had never seen before. Fury that his authority was being challenged so directly. Very well, he said, his voice stripped of all warmth. You have made your choice. Now I will make mine. If you proceed with this shameful little affair, do not expect us to be there. We will not lend our name or our presence to such a public embarrassment. Your absence from the family's traditional path will be noted, and so will ours from your ceremony. That will be our statement. Do you understand me, Hadley? You will be on your own. The words hit me like a physical blow. It was one thing to expect their disapproval. It was another to be handed a formal, cold-blooded ultimatum, an excommunication. I looked around the table one last time, a desperate, silent plea for some sign of softness, of family. I found none. I turned without another word, walked out of the dining room, through the grand foyer, and out the heavy front door into the crisp night air, the sound of the door clicking shut behind me feeling as final as a tomb. I drove to Atticus's apartment in a blur of tears. When he opened the door and saw my face, he simply pulled me into his arms and held me as I sobbed, the story tumbling out of me in broken pieces. He listened patiently, his hand stroking my hair. When I had finished, he held me at arm's length and wiped the tears from my cheeks. Then they won't be there, he said, his voice firm but gentle. It's their loss, Hadley, not ours. We are a family, you and me. That's the only family that matters for our wedding day. We'll have our small ceremony, and it will be beautiful, and it will be filled with people who love us for who we are. It will be real. He was right. The heartbreak was immense, a deep, aching chasm where my family's support should have been. But looking into his eyes, I felt a new kind of strength solidify within me. It was the strength of a choice made, of a path taken. We were on our own, yes, but we were on it together. The weeks following the ultimatum were a strange mix of grief and liberation. A heavy silence descended from Beacon Hill. My phone, once buzzing with my mother's directives and my sister's passive-aggressive check-ins, fell quiet. It was as if a constant grinding noise I had lived with my entire life had suddenly stopped, leaving a ringing stillness in its wake. There was a profound ache in that silence, a daily mourning for the family I wished I had. But beneath the ache, a fragile sense of peace began to take root. For the first time, my life was entirely my own. Atticus was my anchor. He didn't try to fill the silence with false cheer or platitudes. He simply sat with me in my grief, holding my hand while I cried, making me tea, and listening without judgment as I cycled through anger, sadness, and resignation. He helped me navigate the difficult conversation with his own family. When we told them that my family would not be attending, their reaction was the polar opposite of the Vances. There was no judgment, only a quiet, sorrowful acceptance, and an immediate outpouring of love. Well, his mother had said, her voice warm and kind over the phone from Vermont, that just means we'll have to give you enough hugs to make up for it. You are our daughter now, Hadley, and we are so proud to have you. Her simple, unconditional acceptance was a balm on my wounded spirit. We began planning our small ceremony, a testament to our resilience. We envisioned a simple city hall affair, followed by a celebratory dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant in the North End. It would be tiny, heartfelt, and entirely ours. We were 2 months into this modest planning when the universe, in its own mischievous way, decided to rewrite our script. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a thick, cream-colored envelope from a law firm in Burlington, Vermont. It was addressed to Atticus. His paternal grandfather, a man Atticus had adored, had passed away nearly a year prior. He had been a retired history professor, a famously frugal man who lived in the same small house for 50 years, drove the same sensible car for 20, and whose greatest indulgence was buying hardcover books. We assumed the letter was a final, minor formality of his estate. We met with the lawyer via video call the following week. The man, a kindly, bespectacled gentleman named Mr. Abernathy, cleared his throat. "Mr. Hawthorne," he began, "your grandfather, as you know, was a man of very particular habits. He was a brilliant scholar and an exceptionally prudent man. He was also, it turns out, a remarkably shrewd and patient investor." He paused, adjusting his glasses. To make a long story short, over the course of 60 years, through a series of carefully chosen, long-term investments in emerging technology companies, your grandfather quietly amassed a considerable fortune. He lived simply because he had no interest in material things. His entire estate, minus a few small charitable bequests, is left to you, his only grandchild. Mr. Abernathy then named a figure so staggering, so utterly divorced from the reality of our lives, that I felt the air leave my lungs. Atticus stared at the screen, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. It was a cosmic twist, a sudden, life-altering inheritance from a man who valued knowledge over wealth. That evening, we sat in stunned silence in Atticus's apartment, the lawyer's words echoing in the quiet room. The sum was enough to change everything, a key that could unlock any door. My first unbidden thought was a flash of dark, vindictive satisfaction, the image of telling my family, of proving that Atticus was now, by their own shallow metrics, more than worthy. But the thought soured as quickly as it appeared. That was their game, not ours. "What does this mean for us?" I asked softly. Atticus was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city lights. "It means," he finally said, turning to me, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across his face, "that we don't have to settle for the Italian restaurant, unless we want to. It means we can do anything." And in that moment, a new vision was born. It wasn't about scaling up to their idea of a wedding. It wasn't about booking the Fairmont and inviting 400 people to prove a point. The idea was far more radical, far more personal. We would take these unforeseen resources and use them not to create a spectacle, but to elevate our vision of intimacy to an art form. We would create a wedding so exquisitely beautiful, so profoundly personal, that its luxury would be found in its privacy, its meaning, and its absolute authenticity. It would be a fortress of our love, built for an audience of 2. The planning became our joyful secret. We flew to the West Coast, seeking a world away from the rigid confines of Boston. On the dramatic cliffs of Malibu, we found Crestview Estate, a private architectural marvel of glass and stone that seemed to float over the Pacific Ocean. It was a place of breathtaking natural beauty and absolute privacy. It was perfect. We hired a photographer, a woman named Marlo Brooks. We chose her not for her accolades, though she had many, but because her portfolio was filled with images that felt like stolen moments, raw, emotional, and intensely alive. We explained our philosophy to her. We wanted the day captured as a story, not a series of poses. We commissioned a Michelin-starred chef, not just to cook, but to design a menu that told our story. A dish inspired by my New England roots, another by Atticus's Vermont upbringing, a dessert that tasted like the autumn afternoon we got engaged. We collaborated with a floral designer who treated her work like sculpture, creating arrangements that felt wild and organic, as if they had grown right out of the cliffside. Every single detail, from the hand-calligraphed vows to the specific vintage of wine served, was chosen by us for us. It was an exercise in profound, intentional celebration. Our wedding day arrived in late October, on a perfect, sun-drenched California afternoon. The guest list totaled 7: Atticus's parents and his sister, my 2 best friends from my social work career, and Atticus's closest friend from law school. That was it. As I walked towards Atticus, who stood waiting for me under a soaring arch of eucalyptus and white orchids, the boundless Pacific stretching out behind him, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. I wore a simple, flowing gown of heavy silk that moved like water in the ocean breeze. I wore no veil, just a few small white flowers tucked into my hair. I saw the raw, unvarnished joy on Atticus's face, and I knew this was the single most real moment of my life. Our vows were not a recitation of traditional promises. We wrote them ourselves, speaking of our journey, of our shared values, of the home we had found in each other. We promised to be each other's sanctuary, to champion each other's dreams, and to always choose authenticity over artifice. When we were pronounced husband and wife, the applause of our 7 guests was nearly lost in the sound of the crashing waves below. It was perfect. Later that evening, after the most exquisite meal we had ever eaten, Atticus and I walked hand in hand to the edge of the estate's infinity pool. Our few guests had retired, leaving us alone under a blanket of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The air was cool, the sound of the ocean a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. We were husband and wife. We had faced down the weight of my family's legacy and had chosen to build our own. We had created a day not of performance or social strategy, but of sacred, unapologetic love. We felt invincible, wrapped in the quiet, perfect bubble of our new life, with no idea that the world, and a certain Boston lifestyle magazine, was about to take notice. The return to Boston felt like waking from a beautiful dream. The golden haze of Malibu was replaced by the familiar, crisp air of a New England November. We moved into a new apartment in Back Bay, a place we chose together. It was a sun-drenched space with high ceilings, built-in bookshelves we immediately began to fill, and a small fireplace that crackled cheerfully on cold evenings. It was a home, not a showpiece. For weeks, we lived in a blissful, private bubble. We were simply Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne, a young married couple building a life. The memory of our wedding was a shared, sacred treasure, a secret garden we could retreat to in our minds. The painful silence from my family persisted, but it had lost its sting. It was simply a fact of our new reality, a closed door we had no intention of trying to reopen. The first ripple in our tranquil pond came in the form of an email from Marlowe Brooks, our photographer. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, its subject line simply, "An artistic inquiry." "Hadley and Atticus," the email began. "I hope this message finds you well and enjoying your first month of marriage. I am still processing the beauty of the collection from your wedding day. As an artist, I must tell you that what you created was more than just a beautiful event. It was a statement. In a world of performative, ostentatious displays, your celebration was a masterclass in authentic, meaningful luxury. The images tell a powerful story, one that I believe could resonate deeply with people and perhaps even shift the conversation around what a true celebration looks like." She went on to explain her conviction. She felt the photos had a cultural significance that transcended a private album. She wanted to submit a carefully curated selection, along with a narrative she would write herself, to a single publication. I would only consider one outlet, she wrote. A magazine that would understand the nuance, that would celebrate the philosophy behind the day, not just the aesthetics. I am thinking of the Patrician Quarterly. They have the intelligence and the reach to tell this story correctly. Please consider it. I believe your story deserves to be told. My first instinct was a sharp, protective no. Our wedding was our sanctuary, not content for a magazine. It was private, a defiant act precisely because it was not for public consumption. I don't know, Atticus, I said, reading the email aloud to him. This feels like letting them in. The whole point was that we didn't need an audience. He was quiet for a moment, thoughtful as always. I understand that, he said. But Marlo was a part of our day. She understood what we were doing. She's not talking about selling photos to a gossip column. She's talking about art, about the story. Maybe the story isn't just for us anymore. He paused, looking at me. Think of all the people, Hadley, who feel that same pressure you felt, who are forced into things that don't feel true to them. Maybe telling the story isn't about inviting judgment. Maybe it's about giving someone else permission to be brave too. His perspective shifted my own. He was right. This wasn't about seeking approval from my family or their world. It was about validating the principle we fought for on a platform that transcended our personal drama. We trusted Marlo. We discussed it for another day, and then we wrote back and gave her our consent, stipulating that the focus must be on the values, not the cost. We signed the release forms, sent them off, and, feeling a small, strange sense of purpose, we promptly forgot about it, assuming it might result in a few artistic photos on a back page months from now, if at all. We vastly underestimated the situation. The Patrician Quarterly was not just any magazine. In Boston, it was the Bible. It was a heavyweight journal of culture, style, and society that landed with a theatrical thud on the polished coffee tables of the city's elite. It didn't follow trends, it created them. To be featured in the Quarterly was not just to be seen, it was to be anointed. Its word was the final one on what constituted taste, class, and, most importantly, the new definition of status. The December issue was released on the first Friday of the month. Atticus and I were blissfully unaware, enjoying a quiet dinner at home. My phone buzzed with a text from one of the friends who had been at our wedding. It was a photo, taken hastily, of a magazine cover on a newsstand. The photo was dominated by one of Marlo's most stunning shots. Me, laughing, my face turned towards Atticus, the dramatic Malibu cliffs and the endless ocean behind us. And above the masthead, in bold, elegant lettering, was the headline. The New Elite Luxury, How Hadley Vance and Atticus Hawthorne Redefined Celebration. I stared at my phone, my fork clattering onto my plate.
"Atticus," I whispered, holding the phone out to him. His eyes widened. We sat in stunned silence for a moment, then simultaneously scrambled for his laptop. He pulled up the digital edition. It wasn't just a feature. It was the cover story, the lead article, a 12-page spread. We scrolled through the pages, our hearts pounding. Marlo's photos were breathtaking, each one a testament to emotion and artistry. But it was the text that made us gasp. The article, written by the magazine's celebrated editor-in-chief, wasn't a fawning society recap. It was a brilliant, searing piece of cultural analysis. It began, "In an age of performative spectacle, where celebrations are often measured in decibels and guest counts, a quiet revolution has taken place on a cliffside in Malibu. The wedding of Hadley Vance, of the Boston Vances, and attorney Atticus Hawthorne was not an event for the masses. It was an event for two souls, and in its profound intimacy, it has set a new, almost unattainable standard for what luxury truly means." The article went on to praise every decision we had made, framing them not as budget choices, but as deliberate, powerful acts of discerning taste. Our small guest list was lauded as the ultimate status symbol, a circle so secure it requires no outside validation.
My simple silk gown was described as an emblem of understated confidence, a rejection of dated ostentation. The personalized menu, the meaningful vows, the choice of a private estate over a public ballroom, it was all hailed as a masterclass in the return to intimacy, the unpretentious grandeur, and the redefinition of status from public display to profound personal expression. It painted our wedding as the very pinnacle of sophistication, the ultimate insider move. It positioned us not as rebels who had abandoned tradition, but as visionaries who had created a new one. In 12 glossy, impeccably written pages, the Patrician Quarterly had taken our private act of defiance and broadcast it to our world as the aspirational ideal. It had validated us in a language our family couldn't ignore, using the very metrics of status and taste they worshipped. I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, my mind struggling to reconcile our quiet, personal day with this thunderous public declaration. We had acted without any thought of them, and in doing so, had inadvertently achieved the one thing they coveted above all else: unimpeachable, culture-defining prestige. We closed the laptop, the silence in our apartment now charged with a completely new energy. The door to our private world had been blown off its hinges. We looked at each other, a mixture of shock, awe, and a dawning, terrifying sense of amusement in our eyes. And then my phone began to ring. It was a number I knew by heart, a number that hadn't called me in almost a year. The screen glowed with a name I had almost forgotten I had in my contacts: Larkin. The ringing of the phone seemed to suck all the air out of the room. For months, that device had been a peaceful conduit to the world we had chosen. Now it was a direct line back to the one we had escaped. My hand trembled slightly as I pressed the screen to answer. "Larkin," I said, my voice surprisingly even. "Hadley." Her voice, usually a carefully modulated instrument of polite superiority, was tight, brittle. It had a tremor I'd never heard before. I just saw the Quarterly." I waited, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch. "It's quite something," she finally managed. The word something was doing an immense amount of work. "It's being discussed, you know. Everyone is talking." She began to speak faster, the words tumbling out. "Cousin Beatrice called, asking if the estate was truly as spectacular as it looked. And Mrs. Fitzwilliam from the garden club. She cornered me at the grocer's. She said it was breathtakingly modern. Modern, Hadley. You know Mrs. Fitzwilliam. Her approval is the gold standard." I did know Mrs. Fitzwilliam. She was a fearsome arbiter of Boston society, a woman whose quiet nod could validate a family for a generation. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. "I'm glad she approved," I replied, my voice cool and placid, betraying none of the chaotic satisfaction bubbling inside me. "Well, yes, of course. It was all so unexpected." The carefully chosen word was meant to imply that I had been deceitful. A private estate in Malibu?
We all thought you were just going to elope or something equally understated. The word understated was delivered with a faint, quickly swallowed sneer. There was another pause, and I could practically hear her calculating her next move. Mother and father were just saying, perhaps we should all have a small family dinner soon to properly celebrate your union. The invitation hung in the air, laden with unspoken motivations. A proper celebration, now that our union had been stamped with the ultimate seal of elite approval. Not because they regretted their absence, but because their absence now made them look foolish, out of touch. They wanted to be seen celebrating what they had so vehemently condemned. "That's a very kind offer, Larkin," I said, drawing out the words, letting their hollow sincerity resonate. "Atticus and I are quite busy settling into married life, but I'll keep it in mind." I made no commitment.
This wasn't about vindictiveness. It was about protecting the authentic space we had built. It was about not letting them re-enter our world on their terms after they had so emphatically abandoned us on ours. The calls continued, a predictable, pathetic cascade. My mother's came the next morning. Her approach was more subtle, her voice as smooth and polished as marble, laced with thinly veiled guilt. "Darling," she cooed, "your father and I have been so worried. We heard some whispers. People have been speculating about why we weren't there. It has put us in such a delicate position. You know how important appearances are, especially for your father's position in the Senate." Appearances. It always, always came back to appearances. I almost laughed. "Mother," I stated calmly, "Atticus and I made our choices, and you made yours. We understood the message your absence sent. I'm simply living with the consequences, as are you." A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Hadley, how can you be so callous? We only wanted what was best for you, a wedding befitting your heritage. This sudden lavishness, it's completely out of character for what you told us you wanted." "It was lavish, Mother, yes," I agreed, a crucial distinction forming in my mind. "But it was also profoundly intimate. Every detail was chosen for us, not for an audience of 400. That's the difference. And that, apparently, is the new elite luxury. Authenticity, not just display." I threw the magazine's own words back at her. Eleanor was momentarily silenced, her usual poise faltering. "Well, yes, it is beautiful, truly. Everyone is quite impressed. Senator Thompson's wife even asked for Marlowe's contact information." She saw an opening, a way to reclaim control. "Perhaps we could host a small reception here at the estate for those who couldn't attend the ceremony, a sort of redo, but smaller." A redo at the Vance estate, the very place where they had issued their ultimatum. The thought was galling. It would be an act of erasure, an attempt to bring our authentic memory under their domain, to co-opt our narrative. "No, Mother," I said, firmly but gently. "There will be no redo. Our wedding was perfect, exactly as it was. It doesn't need repeating or legitimizing by anyone's standards." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken resentment, a quiet war waged across telephone lines. Even Graham, my father, called. His voice, usually so commanding on the Senate floor, was clipped, almost strained. "Hadley," he began, dispensing with any preamble, "I understand you've made quite a splash. The quarterly piece has certainly turned heads. There's been some speculation. A few of my colleagues have raised questions. It's important to maintain a united front, you understand, for the family's sake, for my re-election prospects." This was his bottom line, always. His career, his image, his power. "Father," I responded, my voice mirroring his own clipped tone, "my marriage to Atticus is a personal matter. It has nothing to do with your political standing. If people are speculating, it's because you chose to make your absence a public statement." "A statement for your own good, Hadley, to show you the gravity of your decisions, to protect the family's legacy." His voice rose, the familiar authoritarian bark returning. "My legacy," I countered, feeling a surge of calm clarity, "is mine to build, and it doesn't require your approval to stand strong." He sputtered, a rare occurrence. This new elite luxury nonsense. It's all well and good, but it's still not the Thorn name, Hadley. It's new money, essentially. The old prejudice, the unshakable belief that only inherited status truly mattered, finally surfaced despite the magazine's praise. "It's not about the money, Father," I patiently explained, for what felt like the thousandth time. "It's about values, about authenticity, about building something real, not just inheriting it." He ended the call abruptly, a frustrated click echoing in my ear. Atticus was my rock through it all. He listened patiently to my recounting of each call, his kind smile lines deepening with understanding. "They're scrambling, aren't they?" he observed one evening as we cooked dinner together, the scent of garlic and herbs filling our cozy kitchen. "Their entire world operates on a very specific set of rules, and you just rewrote them without even trying." The first face-to-face encounter occurred 2 weeks later, at the annual Winter Gala for the Symphony Orchestra, an event my family considered a command performance. As Atticus and I entered the grand ballroom, a subtle, palpable hush fell over the crowd. Heads turned. Whispers followed in our wake. We, who had been a non-entity and a pariah, were now the undeniable center of attention. People who had previously offered only polite nods now approached us with genuine curiosity and effusive compliments. Mrs. Fitzwilliam herself beamed at me. "Simply divine, Hadley. Such exquisite taste. You've shown us all how it's done now." Then I saw them, my family, standing near the grand staircase like a royal court in exile. Larkin and Arden looked stiff and off balance. My mother's serene smile was fixed in place, but I could see the tension in her jaw. My father, standing tall in his tuxedo, looked like he was bracing for a diplomatic incident. They saw us, and I knew they had no choice but to approach. To not do so would be a fatal social error. "Hadley, Atticus," Eleanor said, her voice smooth as silk as they drew near. "Such a lovely evening." "It is, Mother," I replied, my arm linked securely through Atticus's. Graham cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over Atticus with a new, grudging assessment. "Hadley, we've been speaking with people. They've certainly taken notice of your recent endeavors." "Yes, Father. The magazine feature was quite comprehensive." I met his piercing blue eyes and held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. A silent acknowledgement passed between us. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted. He struggled for a moment, then conceded. It certainly got people talking. It was Eleanor who made the move. She placed a hand on Graham's arm, her practiced hostess smile firmly in place. "Hadley, dear, we'd love for you and Atticus to join us for Christmas Eve dinner at the estate. Just family. It's been too long." It was the concession. Not an apology, but a strategic invitation, extended publicly to mitigate the social cost of their absence. It was a move to reclaim the narrative. I looked at Atticus. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, a silent message of absolute support. "Your call." "We'd be happy to, Mother," I said, and the flicker of surprise in her eyes was my reward. "On one condition." Eleanor's smile tightened. "Oh?" "That we are invited as Atticus and Hadley, as the family you want to celebrate, not as a problem you need to solve or a family obligation you need to fulfill." The demand, though politely stated, was clear. They had to acknowledge us, not just manage us. My mother looked at my father, a silent, lightning-fast communication passing between them. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, darling," Eleanor said, her warmth not quite reaching her eyes. "Always." It was a small victory, but a significant one. A reluctant acknowledgement that our authenticity, even without their blessing, now commanded its own respect. We had been summoned back into the fold, but this time we would be entering on our own terms. The Vance estate on Christmas Eve felt less like a home and more like a beautifully decorated stage set for a happy family. A towering Fraser fir, adorned with generations of heirloom ornaments, stood sentinel in the grand foyer. The scent of pine, gingerbread, and simmering tension filled the air. As Atticus and I entered, we were greeted with the flurry of forced cordiality. The dinner was an interesting affair. The conversation was a masterpiece of avoidance, a delicate dance around the enormous, glossy elephant in the room. Larkin, seated opposite me, probed with surgical precision. Not about my happiness, but about the logistics of our newfound cachet. Malibu must have been divine, Hadley. Did you use a local event planner? I hear the ones in LA are simply leagues ahead. Arden, in turn, name-dropped a series of high-fashion designers, subtly trying to reassert her own territory of luxury. They were trying to deconstruct our success, to find a formula they could replicate. My father remained largely silent, observing Atticus with a guarded, analytical gaze, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. He spoke of political currents and economic forecasts, conversations that were like armor, shielding him from any topic that required personal vulnerability. Eleanor, ever the hostess, flitted between subjects with practiced ease, but I could see the strain in the tight set of her smile. She was working tirelessly to maintain the illusion of normalcy, but the foundation had been fractured, and we could all feel the tremors. Atticus was magnificent. He was gracious and engaging, answering their superficial questions with a sincerity that seemed to gently disarm them. He spoke of his work, of our quiet evenings, of the joy of building a home. His groundedness was a stark contrast to their brittle artifice, and in that opulent dining room, his quiet strength shone brighter than any antique silver chandelier. We didn't stay late. As we stepped out into the crisp Boston night, leaving the warm glow of the estate behind, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had walked into the lion's den, and we had walked out not just unscathed, but entirely whole. In the new year, the ripples from the quarterly article continued to expand, creating opportunities I could never have imagined. My quiet life of social work was unexpectedly and powerfully amplified. One afternoon, I received a call from the executive director of the Commonwealth Compassion Initiative, one of Boston's most respected nonprofits, focused on housing and support for underprivileged families. Miss Vance, the director, a warm, earnest man named Mr. Sterling, said, "We've been so impressed with your dedication in the field, of course, but also, if I may be so bold, with your recent visibility. That Patrician Quarterly piece was remarkable. It highlighted a refreshing approach to values that we believe resonates with our own mission of supporting genuine community well-being. We were hoping you might consider joining our board. Your influence, your perspective, it could truly make a difference." I was stunned. This wasn't a ceremonial society wife position. This was a chance to effect real change on a larger scale, using the very cachet my family worshipped to advance the causes I truly believed in.
I accepted without hesitation. Weeks later, another call came, this one from Julian Albright, a renowned architect known for his innovative, sustainable designs. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice articulate and passionate, "I was inspired by your story. I'm working on a new initiative, a series of affordable, eco-friendly housing developments. It's about building dignity, not just dwellings. I believe your unique perspective, your ability to bridge worlds would be invaluable. Would you consider serving as a consultant on community engagement?" It was another moment of breathtaking synergy. My authenticity, the very quality that had once made me an outcast in my own family, was now being sought after as a professional asset. It was the ultimate vindication. My family watched my star rise with a mixture of confusion and consternation. Larkin attempted to co-opt the trend, hosting a sustainable fashion luncheon where the conversation felt as recycled as the glass plates. Arden, in response, announced an extravagant charity ball, a desperate attempt to prove that her brand of overt opulence was still the gold standard. They were chasing an echo, trying to replicate an outcome without understanding its origin. They were performing authenticity, and the effort showed. As the first anniversary of our wedding approached, a year to the day of our perfect Malibu celebration, Eleanor called. She suggested another quiet family dinner at the estate. "No fuss, darling," she insisted, "just us, to celebrate your first year." I hesitated, but Atticus's words echoed in my mind. "It's different now, Hadley. You walk in there as yourself." We accepted. The house was the same, but I was different. The portraits of my stern-faced ancestors no longer seemed intimidating, but merely quaint. The air, once thick with expectation, felt lighter. The dinner began with the same polite, surface-level chatter as on Christmas Eve.
But as the main course was served, my father cleared his throat. The table fell silent. He looked across the table, his gaze resting on me, then on Atticus. "Hadley," he began, his voice gravelly, "I had lunch with Senator Thompson last week." He paused, taking a sip of water. "He spoke very highly of your work with the housing initiative, called it a model for community engagement." He set the glass down, his eyes finding mine again. "And he specifically mentioned your wedding. He called the entire philosophy behind it visionary, said it showed a new kind of influence." He looked directly at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that was stripped of political calculus. It wasn't an apology, not a full-throated conversion to my way of thinking, but it was acknowledgement. It was a genuine, grudging admission, spoken in the only language he truly valued, the language of influence and respect from his peers. The man who had dismissed my choices as shameful was now quoting a colleague who called them visionary. A quiet, "Thank you, Father," was all I said. It was all that was needed. The silent war was over, not with a bang, but with a quiet, reluctant concession. Later, driving away from the estate for the last time in this story, a profound sense of closure washed over me. The grand mansion, receding in the rearview mirror, no longer felt like a symbol of my oppression, but like a museum I had visited, whose artifacts no longer had any power over me. The moral victory wasn't in their forced recognition, but in my utter lack of need for it. My life with Atticus continued to be our sanctuary of grounded joy. My work flourished, creating tangible good in the world. We had built our world, brick by authentic brick, and it was beautiful, it was ours. And its quiet strength had proven to be infinitely more powerful than any inherited status or curated image. We were free. And in that freedom, we had found everything that truly mattered. We had found ourselves, and in doing so, we had found each other.